I can still picture the way she smiled that morning. For the first time in months, it wasn't distant or strained, it felt genuine, even affectionate. Sitting across from her at the kitchen table, I found myself wondering if this was a turning point, a sign that maybe things were improving. Maybe we weren't as broken as I had thought. Then, as she took a sip of her coffee, she spoke, dropping a single sentence that shattered everything. "I want a divorce, Nathan." No build-up. No hesitation. She said it as casually as if she were reminding me we were out of milk. I stared at her, waiting for some kind of punchline, but there was none. She simply looked at me, expecting a response, as if she had just asked me to pass the salt. I should have felt devastated, overwhelmed with panic, desperate to understand why. But instead, an unexpected wave of relief washed over me. It was so strong I almost laughed. And I think that's what unsettled her the most. She had anticipated shock, maybe even a fight. What she hadn't expected was my calm acceptance. Rather than reacting, I took my time, bringing my coffee to my lips for a slow sip before placing the mug back on the table. Then, with a composure I hadn't realized I possessed, I met her gaze. "Okay." Her lips parted slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough for me to notice. She had braced herself for resistance, for an argument, for me to beg her to stay. Instead, I agreed as if it was the most natural thing in the world. That hesitation in her expression told me everything. I had just taken control of the situation. She finally spoke. "You don't have anything to say?" I shrugged. "Not really. If that's what you want, then let's do it." She hadn't been expecting that. Not at all. And that's when I knew I had the upper hand. Those first few moments after she made her announcement set the tone for everything that followed. She had walked into this conversation believing she was in control, that she was the one dictating the terms. But she had underestimated me. What she didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. And by the time she understood what was happening, it would be too late to change course. I watched as she processed my reaction, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug, her posture shifting just slightly. She had assumed I would crumble, that I would plead with her to reconsider. But my steady demeanor had thrown her off. After a brief pause, she let out a small, nervous laugh. "Wow, that was fast. I didn't expect you to just accept it like that." Leaning back in my chair, I studied her. This was the same woman who had been pulling away from me for over a year, delayed responses to my texts, more nights out, coming home later and later. I wasn't oblivious. I had my suspicions. But rather than confronting her, I had chosen to wait, to observe, to prepare. And now the moment had arrived. "Caroline," I said smoothly, taking another sip of coffee, "I don't see the point in dragging this out if you've already made up your mind. So let's get started. Do you already have a lawyer, or should I have mine draft the papers?" There it was, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The realization that I wasn't playing the role of the heartbroken husband she had envisioned. She hesitated. "Well, I haven't exactly figured out all the details yet." Liar. She had thought this through. Probably for weeks, if not longer. The way she had delivered her decision so effortlessly this morning made it clear this wasn't impulsive. She had counted on me reacting with resistance, giving her the opportunity to play the part of the woman who had no choice but to convince her unwilling husband to let her go. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. I stood up and stretched as if this were any other morning. "All right then. I'll call my lawyer today and have them send over a draft. No need to drag this out." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "Wait, you're really okay with this?" I shrugged. "What's the alternative? Begging you to stay?" "No thanks. If you're done, you're done." Her mouth opened slightly as if to respond, but she quickly closed it. I could see the gears turning in her head. This conversation was not playing out the way she had envisioned. She had expected emotions, maybe even an argument. But instead, she was met with unwavering acceptance. Walking to the sink, I rinsed out my coffee mug. Then, in the most casual tone I could manage, I added, "By the way, I assume you'll be moving out soon? Or should I start looking for a new place?" Her head snapped up. "Wait. I'm moving out." I turned to face her, tilting my head slightly. "Well, yeah. I mean, you're the one who wants to start a new life. I figured you already had a plan for where you'd be staying." Her mouth opened and closed, struggling to find the right words. She had planned for this, I knew she had. But now she was being forced to say it out loud. "Well," she finally said, forcing a smile, "I thought we could take things slow. You know, figure things out together first." I almost laughed. She wanted me to go along with whatever fantasy she had built in her head, a smooth, amicable separation, staying friends, easing into her new life. Most likely with the person she had been spending all that extra time with. Not happening. I kept my expression neutral. "I think it's better if we make a clean break." Her smile wavered, just slightly. "Good. I wasn't angry. Not yet. The anger would come later once I had fully processed everything. But right now, I was savoring this moment. For the first time in a long while, I held the reins. Caroline believed she was calling the shots, that the decision was solely hers. What she didn't realize was just how much control I had over the situation. And by the time she figured it out, it would be far too late. I chose not to mention it again, not that day, not the following one. Instead, I carried on with my life as if nothing had changed. That unsettled Caroline more than anything. She kept watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction, an outburst, a breakdown, some desperate attempt to win her back. But I gave her nothing. Just quiet acceptance. And that wasn't part of the plan she had envisioned. By the third day, she started testing me. During dinner, she sat across the table, idly twirling her fork in her food as if she were waiting for the right moment to drop a revelation. So, I was thinking maybe we should try therapy first, just to make sure we're making the right decision. I looked up, chewing slowly. Therapy? Yeah? After she had blindsided me with her decision to end things? This wasn't about fixing anything, she was buying time. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. That's interesting. You seemed pretty certain just the other day. Her fingers twitched slightly. Well, yes, but I just want to make sure we're handling this properly. We've built a life together, Nathan. I don't want us to become one of those couples who grow to hate each other. Ah, there it was. She wanted a clean break, no guilt, no messy consequences. She had painted herself as the responsible, composed partner who was navigating the divorce with maturity, while I was supposed to be the devastated one, clinging to what we had. But I wasn't going to play that role. I leaned back in my chair, stretching. I don't think therapy is necessary. You've made your decision, haven't you? No reason to prolong it. She stared at me, her lips pressing together as if she had just swallowed something bitter. So that's it? You're just giving up? I gave her a small, knowing smile. No, Caroline. You gave up. Silence. She wanted to argue, I could see it in her expression. But what could she say? That she hadn't really thought this through? That she had expected me to fight for a marriage she had already emotionally checked out of? Instead, she pushed her chair back and stood. I'm going to bed. I watched her leave unfazed. The real game was just beginning. She had a secret, one she thought I was oblivious to. Over the next week, I started making quiet moves. I transferred half of our joint savings into a separate account. I met with my lawyer to strategize the best way to divide assets in a way that favored me. I even started browsing apartments, just in case I decided I didn't want to keep our house. Meanwhile, Caroline grew restless. She brought up the divorce casually, slipping it into conversations, gauging my reaction. But each time I responded with indifference, she seemed increasingly frustrated. She wanted me to be the one struggling, the one questioning everything. One evening, she came home later than usual. I was already in bed, scrolling through my phone, when she slid under the covers beside me. I turned my head slightly. Late night? She tensed. Just had some errands to run. Right? Errands? I could sense the lie, but I didn't call her out on it. She thought she was being discreet, but she had no idea what I had already uncovered. Caroline had been preparing for this for a while. I had suspected as much, but now? Now I had proof. It was the small things, the extra time spent on her phone, the unexplained disappearances on weekends. But the biggest giveaway? The way she no longer bothered to pretend around me. She no longer feigned interest, no longer masked her boredom. That only happens when someone believes they already have one foot out the door. So I started digging. Not obsessively, but methodically. I checked her old laptop, the one she assumed I never touched. And there it was. An email. Saved in her drafts, never sent. I can't wait until it's just us. Nathan won't fight it, he's too passive. He thinks I'm just figuring things out, but I'm already done. Once the money is settled, we can finally be together. I stared at the screen for a long time, my chest tightening. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was something else. Satisfaction. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. No, I was going to let her believe she was still steering the ship. Because what she didn't realize was that I had already turned the tide in my favor. And soon, she would regret ever thinking she could outmaneuver me. The more I watched her, the clearer it became she wasn't just planning to leave me. She was securing her future. The late nights, the forced conversations, the sudden interest in self-discovery, it all pointed to one thing. She had someone waiting for her on the other side of this divorce. She was playing it safe, making sure to take as much as possible before officially cutting ties. I wasn't going to stop her. Instead, I let her believe she had one. So, I adopted the role of the indifferent, unbothered husband. No accusations, no confrontations, not even a hint of skepticism when she mentioned her so-called errands. If she wanted to think I was passive, I would be the most passive man she had ever encountered. But behind the scenes, I was already several steps ahead, setting everything in motion for the perfect storm. I began making subtle but significant moves. First, I visited the bank, quietly removing my name from certain joint accounts and securing my finances where she wouldn't be able to touch them. Then, I started liquidating assets she had assumed would be part of her future. I cashed out investments, sold off minor properties she had never paid much attention to, and ensured that she wouldn't walk away with the financial safety net she expected. To top it off, I made sure my lawyer took the lead and filed for divorce first. The moment Caroline received the papers, I caught the flicker of panic in her eyes, just for a brief second before she forced a smile. "Wow, you really wasted no time, huh?" she said with a casual tone. I simply shrugged. Like I said, no reason to drag this out. Her grip on the papers tightened as she tried to process what had just happened. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She had planned to dictate the pace, to remain in control. I wasn't supposed to be the one taking initiative. Over the next few days, her attitude began to shift. The confidence she had carried, the almost smug certainty about moving forward, started to crack. She lingered around me more, engaging in small talk, even offering to cook dinner, something she hadn't done in a long time. I let her believe she had a chance to slow things down, to reclaim the power she thought she had. Then I dropped the first bomb. Casually, over an uneventful conversation, I mentioned that I had already secured a new apartment. She looked up from her phone, momentarily caught off guard. "Wait, you're moving out?" "Yeah," I replied with an easy tone. "No point in staying here longer than necessary." She blinked, clearly unsettled. "But don't you think we should figure out the logistics first? I mean, we still have time to sort things out." I smirked. "Actually, no. I think this way is better, quick and clean." Her expression darkened, just slightly. This wasn't what she had expected. She had counted on me dragging my feet, hesitating, needing time. But I was making it too easy, and that threw her off. Then came the second bomb. That weekend, I left early in the morning and didn't return until late at night. When I finally walked through the door, she was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral but laced with curiosity. I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't realize I needed to check in." She hesitated, caught off guard by my response. "I just thought." "I mean, you didn't mention you were going anywhere." I placed my keys on the counter. "You don't tell me where you go either." Silence stretched between us. She hated that. She wanted to ask, to demand an answer, but she had trapped herself. If she questioned me, I would have every right to question her. And that was a conversation she wasn't ready to have. For the first time in a long time, I saw something new in her: uncertainty. She had believed she controlled the outcome, that she dictated how this would play out. But I had rewritten the script, and now she was struggling to keep up. And the best part? She had no idea how much worse it was going to get. After that night, something changed in the house. Caroline, who had been distant and detached, suddenly became present. She lingered in the kitchen while I made my morning coffee, asked casual questions about my day, even found reasons to sit near me on the couch in the evening. It would have been almost amusing if it wasn't so obvious. She wasn't trying to reconnect, not at all. She was trying to regain control. When she had first brought up divorce, she had all the power. In her mind, she was the one making the decision, the one holding the cards. But when I reacted differently, when I moved quickly, when I didn't beg or fight, she lost her grip on the situation. Now, she was scrambling to figure out why. I let her think whatever she wanted. One evening, she walked into the living room while I was sorting through paperwork, casually leaning against the doorframe. "You're really serious about this, huh?" she asked, her voice light but careful. I didn't look up. "You're the one who wanted this, Caroline." She hesitated. "Yeah, but I don't know." "Well, I thought we'd talk about things more before rushing into all these decisions." I finally met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "You had plenty of time to talk before you decided we were done." For a moment, something flickered across her face: guilt, frustration? I couldn't tell. But just as quickly, she masked it with a forced chuckle. "I guess I just didn't expect you to be so efficient about it." Efficient? That was her subtle way of saying, "I never expected you to be the one to pull the rug out from under me." I simply shrugged. Like I mentioned before, there was no sense in prolonging things. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly uneasy. "So, have you told anyone yet?" Ah, there it was. She wasn't asking out of mere curiosity, she wanted to manage the story before it got out of her control. Leaning back in my chair, I tapped my fingers against the table. "A few people." Her lips parted slightly, hesitation flickering across her face. "Like who?" "My lawyer." A couple of friends. I paused just long enough for the tension to build before adding, your mother. That made her stiffen. You told my mom? Tilting my head slightly, I met her gaze. Why wouldn't I? She deserved to hear it from me, don't you think? Caroline's expression faltered. I could see the war playing out in her mind. She wanted to be angry, to accuse me of crossing a line, but she couldn't. She had started all of this. She had assumed she'd be the one to control how people heard the news, how they would perceive the situation. But now? I had beaten her to it. Her mother had not taken it well. Not with me, no, she had been furious with Caroline. The phone call had been brutal. Caroline, what on earth are you thinking? Her mother had demanded. Nathan has been nothing but good to you. Is there someone else? Caroline had tried to downplay it, but her mother wasn't naive. And now Caroline was backed into a corner. She forced a weak smile and attempt to regain some ground. I just didn't want people to get the wrong idea. I smirked. And what idea would that be? Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no way of knowing what I had told them, and that uncertainty was eating away at her. The next few days were fascinating. She was restless, glued to her phone, likely anticipating the fallout. But the reaction she was hoping for never came. The friends we had spoken to weren't offering her sympathy, instead they were skeptical. I had been careful with my words, never directly accusing her of anything, but I had planted enough seeds to make people question things. And just when she thought she was regaining control, I made my next move. One evening we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the air thick with unspoken words. I casually cleared my throat. Oh, by the way, I wanted to give you a heads up. She looked up, her fork hovering over her plate. About what? Leaning back, I stretched my arms. I'll be gone for the weekend. Just figured you should know. Her brows knit together. Gone? Where? I smiled. Just taking a trip. The sound of her fork clinking against the plate filled the silence. A trip? I nodded. Yeah, figured it was time to get away for a bit. Clear my head. She forced a short laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That's sudden. You never take random trips. I shrugged. New chapter, new habits. Her fingers tightened around her glass. You're not, like, going with someone, are you? I raised an eyebrow. Would it matter? That question alone was enough to make her tense. I could see it, the jealousy, the fear, the realization that maybe, just maybe, I was moving on faster than she was. I didn't give her an answer. I didn't owe her one. Instead, I finished my dinner, got up, and walked away, leaving her sitting there with her thoughts. She had expected this divorce to be her victory. But instead, she was beginning to understand she had already lost. The morning I left, Caroline was awake earlier than usual. I could hear her moving around the kitchen, her steps sharper than necessary, deliberate, purposeful. She wanted me to notice her presence, to acknowledge her. I didn't. I packed my bag in silence, took a shower, got dressed, and walked downstairs without hesitation. For the first time in years, I actually had somewhere better to be. When I entered the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, a mug in hand, feigning casual indifference. You're really going, huh? I grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, tossing it up and catching it with ease. Yep. She tilted her head, studying me closely. You never said where. I smirked. Didn't realize I had to. Her fingers curled a little tighter around the mug. It's just sudden. I took a slow bite of the apple, chewing thoughtfully before responding. So was your divorce announcement. That hit hard. She flinched just slightly before masking it with a forced laugh. Right? Well, have fun, I guess. She was waiting for me to slip, to offer some kind of explanation, to say something, anything that would give her insight into what I was thinking. I gave her nothing. I just slung my bag over my shoulder and walked toward the door. Right before stepping out, I turned slightly. Oh, and Caroline? She looked up, her eyes wide with anticipation. Don't wait up. I shut the door before she could respond. The drive was smooth, but my mind wasn't. I had spent years in that house, in her world, making myself smaller, accommodating her needs, adjusting to her moods, meeting her expectations. But today, for the first time, I was free. I didn't go far, just a few towns over. Just enough distance to make it clear I was doing this for me. Not running. Not hiding. I checked into a quiet lakeside cabin. Nothing extravagant. Just peaceful. I powered down my phone and let the entire afternoon slip by without purpose. I sat by the water, inhaling the crisp, cool air, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter, as if a weight I hadn't noticed had finally been lifted. It wasn't until that evening when I turned my phone back on that I saw the missed calls, 6 of them, all from Caroline. A smirk tugged at my lips. She was unraveling. And I let her. Soon after, the messages started flooding in. Caroline, hey, just checking in. Where are you? Caroline, are you ignoring me? Caroline, Nathan, this is childish. Caroline, just tell me where you are. And then the last one. Caroline, who are you with? There it was, the insecurity she always tried to mask. She had convinced herself that she knew me, that I was predictable, easy to read. But now that I was moving differently, responding in ways she hadn't anticipated, she was scrambling for an explanation. I gave her none. Silence would be my response. That night, I found myself in a quiet bar, nursing a drink and observing the world around me. People laughed, shared stories, carried on with their lives. For the first time in so long, I realized I wasn't just Nathan, Caroline's husband. I was simply me. And I liked it. A bartender, a woman around my age with weary eyes but a warm smile, slid another drink my way. Rough day? I chuckled, shaking my head. You have no idea. She leaned on the counter, studying me. Let me guess. Woman trouble. I smirked. More like woman freedom. She laughed, raising her glass to mine. Well, here's to that. And just like that, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. Meanwhile, back home, Caroline was likely pacing, realizing that for once, she was the one left waiting. The roles had shifted, and I wasn't finished yet. By the time I returned home on Sunday evening, I could tell something had changed. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspoken words. Caroline was perched on the couch, her posture rigid, fingers digging into the fabric of her leggings. The television was on, its volume low, an obvious attempt to appear relaxed. But her eyes were locked onto me before I had even fully stepped inside. I dropped my bag to the floor, taking my time as I removed my shoes. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to speak. I didn't. The silence stretched until, at last, she exhaled sharply, as if unable to hold back any longer. So, she began, her voice carefully measured. How was your little trip? I met her gaze, a slow smirk forming. Refreshing. Her eyes narrowed slightly, waiting for me to elaborate. I didn't. Instead, I stretched, letting out a satisfied sigh before heading toward the kitchen. The creak of the couch cushions signaled her shifting position. You didn't answer any of my calls, she pointed out, her voice laced with restrained frustration. I reached for a glass, filled it with water, and turned to face her. Didn't feel like talking? Her lips parted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. You didn't feel like talking? I took a slow sip, meeting her gaze over the rim of the glass. That's what I said. For a brief moment, she just sat there, blinking, her mind racing to find the right response. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted. You could have at least let me know you arrived safely. I was worried. I let out a short chuckle, shaking my head. Were you? She frowned, her expression tightening. Of course I was. I placed my glass down on the counter. That's interesting, considering you didn't seem too concerned about me when you decided to end our marriage. Her sharp intake of breath was almost audible, as if my words had physically struck her. That's not fair. I arched an eyebrow. Isn't it? Her fingers curled into fists on her lap. I didn't think we would end up like this, Nathan. I thought we could handle this like adults. A bitter laugh escaped me. Adults? Caroline, you blindsided me with a divorce, treated it like a simple business decision, and expected me to just accept it. Now that I'm not playing along, that's what bothers you. She opened her mouth, then hesitated, her jaw tightening. She hated this. Hated that I wasn't reacting the way she had envisioned. Hated that I wasn't giving her the dramatic confrontation she had likely rehearsed in her mind. Leaning against the counter, I folded my arms. Let's be honest, Caroline. This isn't about the trip. It's not about me not answering my phone. You're upset because, for the first time, you're not the one in control. Her nostrils flared slightly. That's not true. I smirked. No? Abruptly, she stood, crossing her arms over her chest. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I don't understand what's happening with you. It's like you flipped a switch overnight. I shrugged. Maybe I just finally woke up. For a long moment, we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted. The tension in her shoulders eased ever so slightly. Her eyes softened. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost uncertain. Nathan. I never wanted this to turn ugly. I studied her, searching for any trace of manipulation, but something about her expression struck me as different this time, genuine, even. Doubt. Good. Pushing away from the counter, I grabbed my bag from the floor. I'm going to take a shower. I didn't wait for her reply. As I walked past her, I could feel her eyes following me all the way up the stairs. It was finally sinking in, what I had realized weeks ago. She had made a mistake. And soon she'd regret it more than she ever imagined. The house felt different now, but it wasn't just Caroline's presence that had changed, it was mine. The way I moved, the way I no longer hesitated in my own space, the way I stopped seeking her approval. And she noticed. I saw it in her lingering glances when we crossed paths in the hallway, in the way she tried to pull me into unnecessary conversations, and how she hovered just a second too long. But the biggest shift? She wasn't so sure of herself anymore. A week had passed since my trip, and in that time I had kept moving forward without her. I had secured a new apartment, met with my lawyer, and finalized my plans. I was leaving, and I wasn't looking back. And the more certain I became, the more her confidence wavered. It started subtly. She began offering to cook dinner, something she had barely done in the past year. Then came the small talk, her bringing up old memories as if reminiscing about happier times could erase everything that had happened. But the real turning point came the night before I was set to leave. Most of my belongings were packed. The house felt emptier, colder. I sat on the couch, flipping through a few last-minute documents when she settled beside me. Too close. I didn't acknowledge her right away. I wanted to see how long it would take before she spoke. After what felt like an eternity, she finally took a sharp breath. "Nathan." I glanced at her. "Yeah?" She hesitated, fingers curling into the fabric of her jeans. "Are you sure about this?" Setting my papers down, I met her gaze. "About what?" Her eyes flickered across my face, searching. "About leaving." Leaning back against the couch, I exhaled slowly. "This is what you wanted, Caroline." She swallowed hard. "I thought I did." I tilted my head slightly, watching her. "And now?" Lowering her gaze, she stared at her hands. "Now? I don't know." Silence settled between us. The faint ticking of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator were the only sounds in the room. Then, after a pause, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought being free would make me happy. I thought maybe I was missing something. But these past few weeks have made me realize something else." I waited. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with something raw. I didn't appreciate what I had. For a moment, I just observed her. The person I used to be would have clung to those words, would have seen them as proof that she still loved me, that we could mend what was broken. But the man sitting here now? He was different. I offered a small smile, not bitter, not cruel. Just understanding. "I think you're realizing that too late." Her eyes shimmered, but she quickly blinked away the tears. "Yeah," she whispered. Reaching over, I gently patted her hand before standing. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Caroline." "Truly I do." And with that I walked away. The next morning I packed the last of my things, loaded them into my car, and left without looking back. No dramatic goodbyes, no final confrontation. Just a quiet exit. As I drove away, I felt the weight on my shoulders lift. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was free. And for the first time in a long while, I was truly happy.